So we're up to the 10th episode of season 9, and it was just boring. It introduced some good ideas, and that's the thing. I am astonished at how I can find this episode both interesting and incredibly dull at the same time. It introduced conflicts just to resolve them within the half hour. It was very sweet, but it didn't feel real. So we have an A, B, and a C storyline, and the A storyline was the best, and it was the one where the episode gets its title from, Mom and Dad. First of all, starting right off the bat, they resolve the issue of Barney and Robin not having a preacher by bringing Sam in, and this seems like such a foregone conclusion that it made me realize two things very quickly. One, it was so obvious, I found myself going, why didn't I think of that? Why didn't they think of that? You know, Barney and Robin are not religious, but they still want to get married in a church, and they know a minister. You know, he's right there. He seems like the easy answer, so I don't know why they didn't come to that conclusion sooner. And two, what that does is it just reinforces how much of a non-character that preacher was in Night Vision. And I don't want to continue harping on this, but Night Vision was one of the worst episodes, not only in this season, but in the entire series. It had a very simple message, you know, that Barney and Robin should be proud of who they are and shouldn't feel like they have to hide who they are. First of all, Barney and Robin know that they're awesome. They may have their insecurities and their vulnerabilities, but for the most part, I think they each do genuinely believe that they are awesome. So that their belief, that their resolve in how awesome they are could be tested so easily by this cardboard cutout of a character, just, it didn't feel real, it didn't feel triumphant, it felt like an easy way to say screw you to the church instead of, you know, having a real, honest moment of connection between Barney and Robin. And having the answer to the solution of now we need a preacher be Sam just reinforced how useless that preacher character was. There was no point in him other than to get in their stuffy, you know, old world religion jokes, and isn't he I don't have fun, you know, no, because I am religious and we don't have fun, and I'm sorry, I said I wasn't going to harp on it, but the preacher's death is some of the most painfully unfunny stuff I've ever seen. It's written off almost immediately. It's more of an inconvenience. Oh, now we gotta find another preacher. And the other horrible thing it did was then Ted thinks that he's free of Cassie, but in the process of toasting the dead priest, he, you know, finds out that Cassie was his granddaughter, so now, oh crap, now he has to console Cassie, and he's not gonna get to have sex this weekend. And it painted these characters in some of the most horrible ways, you know, that they've been portrayed the entire series, and I hated that episode. I absolutely hated it, and you know, having Sam come in now was like a breath of fresh air, because I wish this was how more preachers were portrayed in the media. So Sam has arrived to save the day, and Jerome is also there now with his wife. So now both Barney and James's fathers and their mother are all under the same roof. And it's the first time it may be the only time it's ever been that way. And of course this leads both Barney and James to start thinking, wouldn't it be great if my mom ended up back with my dad and my family was whole again? And you know, it was an interesting concept to introduce. They played it mostly for laughs, but you know, that scene where they go into the black and white and Barney and James are singing and it's very 50s with the outfits and all that. It was a good visual way to indicate that, you know, they're both kind of regressing to a point where they're both wishing they could get an experience of their childhood back that they're not going to have. It just can't happen. But the one thing I really liked about that is it's a complicated situation. But the thing was, there's no bitterness from anybody at any time during the story. You know, this could very easily have been played out like a soap opera and gotten very melodramatic. But it did feel very honest, and they never shied away from the fact that it was an awkward, complicated situation, but they never played it for cheap drama, which was, you know, I don't know if it was even a difficult balance for them to strike, because they did it so well, they made it look so easy. So Loretta finally does end up with Sam about the middle of the episode, and again, it struck me because we don't know much about Loretta's backstory and how she ended up with Jerome and Sam. All we get is Sam says that, you know, they dated briefly, and when Loretta got pregnant, she told Sam that she wanted to raise the baby on her own. And Sam said that he always wanted to be a part of James's life, but he also wanted to respect Loretta's wishes at the same time. So now Sam and Loretta are back together and sparks are flying, and I guess what interests me about that is, obviously they did not end up getting married, but it doesn't seem like they ended on particularly harsh terms. It seems like they kind of just parted ways, but obviously there's a connection there, and because they still feel it after all these years, so it makes me think, well, why didn't they get married? Were they just too young? Were they not ready? What, you know, it just, this is such interesting stuff, and, you know, for something that is just glanced over, if anything deserved a continuing storyline in this season, it's the stuff with Barney and James and their parents. This is some of the best writing we've gotten all season, and I hate that it was only given a single episode to be introduced and then wrapped up all neat and nice and everything's okay. I'm glad it didn't go for cheap drama. Like, I feel like the sudden onset tension between Robin and Barney's mother was really hastily done and not handled well, and then hastily wrapped up because we needed to be wrapped up. But this story with Barney and James and their parents was the first stuff all season I really have this burning desire to see more of, other than the locket, and you know, and other than James's divorce. When it was introduced that James had gotten a divorce, I thought that was going to be his story for the rest of the season. We were going to find out what happened, how he felt about it, and, you know, the most we got was the thing where he didn't want to take off his wedding ring, which, you know, raised more questions than it answered. And I don't know if they're ever going to get back to that. I'd love it if they did. But I would also love to see more of this story with their parents now, and I don't think, with all the ground that still needs to be covered, I don't think we're going to get any more of that, which is a shame. The other two stories were nowhere near as interesting, and, you know, they just took time away from Barney and James and their parents, and, you know, for the first one with Marshall and Daphne really bothered me. You know, it started out the perfect way. It opened up right with them singing the Proclaimers in the car. That's exactly where I wanted them to go with that. You know, when the episode ends with Marshall says, it'll come around. And it did. That was perfect. The last time we saw Marshall and Daphne, there was a huge shift in dynamic in their character. You know, and when Marshall said, "You threw a live grenade into my marriage," and we don't see Marshall get harsh very often. So when he does, it really stands out. And I felt like this was one time where, you know, not only are we seeing it, but it's actually justified, because that was out of line for Daphne to reveal that information to Lily. And she was sorry about it, but it was just, again, it was just sort of glanced over. But I like the fact that Marshall did get serious about it, and he said, you know, I can't take this lightly. In the next episode, not only are they, you know, both singing over the Proclaimers, but it goes right back to Marshall being in the submissive position, and he says, one of the first things he says to Daphne is, "I don't get it, why are you mad at me?" And did we skip a few pages in the script? You know, the last I heard, you know, you were mad at her for what she did to you and Lily. You know, where is this coming from? And then we find out in a flashback, sort of, that Daphne's upset because her daughter doesn't want her to come to the Model UN, and she's upset because she's absent in her daughter's life because she's divorced and she can't be with her daughter as much as she would like. It's good stuff, but again, I feel like they didn't handle it very well, because, you know, she says that she works as hard as she does to provide for her daughter. And at one point she has a line, "Kids don't understand logic, they understand who shows up." And I'm sorry, but yeah, that's true. Providing for your kids is you know, important, but being there for them emotionally is equally as important. You know, because that is what a kid is going to remember. They're going to remember if the parent supported them, not if the parent was consistently financially stable. kids don't worry about that because they don't know, and if they're lucky enough, they live in a childhood where, you know, it's not an issue, but it bothered me that it was kind of treated with resentment, like, oh, she should know better, and maybe that wasn't even the intention behind the line, but that's kind of how it came across. And of course, Marshall takes her to the Model UN instead of dropping her off at home, and everything's fine, which it should be. The one thing that surprised me, though, they've spent so much time on Daphne as a character. I kind of thought her story arc was going to end with more of a resolution, instead of Marshall just dropping off and saying goodbye, but that's pretty much what happened. I guess only because we've spent so much time with her, and I really got to like her character, and I appreciate that they did not force an emotionally long, drawn-out goodbye onto the scene if it didn't really call for one, and I feel like it didn't really call for one here. And, you know, sometimes in life there are loose ends, and if there ever was going to be a story that it kind of ended without a resolution or a conclusion, this was a perfect one to do that with. I wish they had done that with the Slutty Pumpkin. So, you know, I'm not going to complain too much. That had a nice ending. The third story